Morning. So if you can tell from my title, we were putting our titles together and our talks together about 2 days after the spring freeze in the middle of March. And so hence the severe damage, right? But I think if you look at the fields, at least here in this area, we're not really seeing severe damage, right? We may have had a severe freeze, but we didn't necessarily have as much damage as we had anticipated. And I think we're still struggling a little bit to understand that. Did anybody have to terminate their wheat fields? Anybody had to kill any wheat because of the damage?
I had a brother that did about 3,000 acres.
Yeah?
I wouldn't have. He asked me and I said, nope, don't do it. Don't do it.
And he did it anyway.
But
You
I
should have
didn't
set him to
know
keep
that,
it.
And planted corn and wheat that didn't spray made more than the corn did.
Yeah.
Because that was a drought that year.
Yeah.
I won't forget that one.
That's right. That's exactly right. And so I don't have any of the 2007 data up here, but that is one of the years we really are looking back at right now, is to compare 2017 to 2007, because for sure there were some similarities, right? The difference was in 2007 there was a whole lot more damage, a whole lot more lodging of wheat in certain areas and total death. 2017, we're still scratching our heads a little bit that the wheat crop still looks so good. But just kind of set the stage, what happened. And so if we look at heat units or accumulated growing degree days that we've accrued this year in 2017, so I just picked several different cities across the state. And if we average it, we're talking about 3,700 heat units this year that we've accumulated from planting till May 2nd, okay? If we compare that to 2012, which was another year that there was a pretty significant spring freeze that actually damaged wheat, that year had about 3,600. What about 2014? Does anybody remember that year? You should remember it was my first field season here. Nobody remembers my first wheat field day? You remember it, Mr. Oates? Okay. Well, other than it was my first wheat field day, we were actually really far behind. It was a cold year. Do y'all remember that? We were 3 weeks behind at the field day that year. And so when we look at that, 3 weeks behind is about 2,400 growing degree days. And so if we look at the calendar date, what calendar date does the wheat think it is? On average across the state, we're talking late May. So we're 3 weeks early this year. So when are we going to harvest? Any guesses?
10th of June.
10th of June. I don't know. I don't know when we're going to harvest. The thing was,
Might be a little guess rate.
yeah. I'm not sure. You know, we are projected to have a really mild May, right? Lower than normal temperatures. And so we may be lucky and have a little bit extended grain fill season this May. Couple that with April being so warm after this freeze event, and we having all those tillers. I think most of the wheat crop throughout the state had lots and lots of tillers. We might actually somehow eke by with some really good wheat yields this year. That's assuming that the stems that we have in our fields are not compromised. And so the last thing I'm concerned about is having some sort of stem damage, and I'll show you that in a moment. We know that there were some developing wheat heads that died this past year. We know that there were stems that actually collapsed, and the tillers took over, and is what we're seeing a lot in these fields. But what we don't know is some of those main stems, did they get compromised? Are they going to be weak? Once we start getting into grain fill, putting weight on those heads, are they going to snap over? So that's sort of my last concern. So, like I said, what severe spring freeze? We really couldn't tell. This is just a chart showing how low it got for how long. And so during really that severe freeze in mid-March, most of Kentucky had, you know, lows in the teens. And what we're looking at, this critical temperature for wheat is 24 when it's at joining, that it could kill the plant. We were there for, you know, 12, 10, 9 hours. It only takes 2 continuous hours to cause damage. And so what we don't understand is how some of these fields seem to have not had any damage at all, right? The question is, are the genetics better? Some people say yes, some people say no. The question is, what's going on with the temperatures? There's something we're not measuring, relative humidity, the fluctuations prior and after, you know, what's going on? Then the question would be, at what height are these temperatures taken, right? And so you can get temperature data from the Mesonet, Ag Weather Service, everything else. But we're talking about a 4 to 5 foot height on those temperature probes, okay? Where's the wheat? At the time of the freeze, we're talking 4 to 6 inches this past year. And so I put out some probes at different positions. I think Chad did as well in Lexington. Put them on the soil surface, put them 4 to 6 inches up, put them about 3 feet up, and then we had that 4 to 5 foot range on the ag weather sites that you can go to. And really, where do you think was the coldest? Right here where that developing wheat head was pretty much the coldest for this event. So for this mid-March event, we're talking about 17, and then the second night, 13 here at Princeton, and it was below 24 for 13 hours straight. We're talking really severe freeze. However, it was able to somehow, you know, how did it repair itself? Well, it didn't repair itself. This year we had such a mild winter, we had lots of tillers. I had some wheat plants that had 10, 12, 15 tillers on them before the freeze, and not all of them were joining. So the ones that were joining, we know died. Can you help me pass these out, Shane? Because these came out of that field. And you can keep these if y'all want. But you can tell these came out of the field. The healthy plants we dug before the freeze out of the field I showed you here. And then we went back 7 days later and dissected down wheat heads again to find damaged frozen heads. And that's what you're looking at there. So we know that the damage actually occurred, but if you go back out to this field, you wouldn't think that there's any stand loss necessarily. The wheat plant, the wheat stands look really nice. And so likely what happened is it retillered because we were super warm in April and we were able to produce a decent crop. Again, if we can stay with a pretty cool May, we might pull off some decent yields if the stems aren't compromised.
Certain time, if it was side dress, a nitrogen was put on it earlier, was probably more apt to freeze.
That's right. And so this field right here is back behind where we're going to have lunch. And I put all my nitrogen on. I was all in on this because it was at peak 7 before the freeze. And I decided that I was going to keep my split application because I did not want to compromise the yield potential. Because we know if we wait past peak 7, we're compromising yield potential. So I rolled the dice, said I'm all in, and I put my nitrogen down. There's a lot of guys that waited, right? They didn't even put their first app down. They knew that the wheat was very far advanced and they didn't want to push it along. And so possibly without that active growth, that may have protected us. We just don't know.
Brother and his son, and they sprayed the wheat before the farm senior showed them because they didn't want to miss the tractor.
Well, you got to have your priorities,
so
you know.
They sprayed early, but I said, well, I waited till
Yeah.
About 10 days after the
Yeah.
after the
Yeah.
sanding.
And so, like I said, I did apply nitrogen on this field. There were other fields on this station that the nitrogen was not applied, and we did not find as much of the growing point damage as we did here. And so I'm not discounting that, but we don't know that through research. We think we know that, but we don't know for sure. So, you know, this is from the wheat guide, ID 125, and it kind of shows the critical temperatures. I know there's some questions. Chad wants to put an X through this table. He hates this table. I'm not quite there yet. I think there were a lot of other mitigating factors going on this year. I don't know what, but it is interesting. I do think we need to revisit this. The wheat did not, yeah, the wheat didn't read the book, by the way, but you know, rarely does the wheat read the book. But I think we do need to spend some time understanding where these numbers come from, because if you start asking other specialists in other states, we all point the finger to one another that we got those numbers from your publication. And so we're not sure where these came from or how old they are. And so it's worth considering trying to figure out a way to understand this better.
Who's got a Sharpie?
I didn't bring my Sharpie. I'm not ready to exit out, Chad, okay? He wants to burn it. He doesn't just want to exit, by the way. But like I said, I just have a few photographs here that show the stem damage. This is 4 to 5 days after that first freeze event, okay? And you can see that you're going from being able to see the individual spikelets of the wheat head to not, okay? And you can see a marked difference. Now, if you don't have an unfrozen control, sometimes even me, I can struggle with, oh, is this starting to show damage yet or not? But this one's very obvious. Earlier damage can still look like this, but instead of being like pearly, you know, it'll be more white instead of translucent, and it won't be as glossy. So if you want to decide early on if there was wheat damage, that's what we did. 2 weeks later, this is what we were seeing out of that same field. Stems being compromised, okay? 4 weeks after the event, I went back out to see what was left, and you're starting to see, even in some of these stems that were remained that didn't die, cracking. Right now, you can go out and well, 3 weeks ago, you could go out and touch the stem, and about where this was and where it's moved up, if you touch it, it'll crack. You hear it crack, it's brittle, okay? And so that's why I say we're not necessarily out of the woods yet. We may still have some damage that could come once we start grain fill. Once we start putting weight in that head, it could snap over, possibly, with some decent winds.